Welcome to the Virginia Civics and Economics Lecture Series. At the end of each slide, there will be a 5-second delay. Use this time to complete your notes. When you are done, push play and move on to the next slide. This presentation will begin in 5 seconds. Welcome to Virginia Civics and Economics Lecture 5.1 on the Executive Branch, and it's time to talk about the boss. Not that boss, though Springsteen is really cool. I'm talking about that boss, or that boss. In other words, I'm talking about the President of the United States of America. How powerful are these people? This guy, George Washington, this guy, Thomas Jefferson, this guy, Abraham Lincoln, and this guy, Theodore Roosevelt, their faces are carved into the side of a mountain in South Dakota. The president is a very powerful person. But the question is, how did the executive branch obtain this power? Today we're going to answer that question. With that said, let's go to the next slide. Like Congress, the powers of the executive branch are stated in the Constitution. The question is, are those powers as specifically stated as they are for Congress? Article 2 of the Constitution sets forth the powers of the executive branch or the president. But unlike Congress, the express powers of the president are vague and open to significant interpretation. It is extremely forbidden to lose an arm when trying to recover your lost leg. You could read that sign just like that, and when it comes to the language in Article 2, you can read it in many different ways. The express powers include Chief of State, as the President is the ceremonial head of the government who accepts foreign dignitaries and represents the country abroad. Chief Executive, as the President is the head of the executive branch of government. Commander-in-Chief, as the President is the head of the nation's armed forces. And Chief Diplomat, as the President is the architect of American foreign policy and signs as a party to treaties with other countries. That's it. No 27 express powers here. So, the less specific the law, the easier to argue what the law means. In other words, the implied powers of the president are huge, and they include Chief of Party, as the president is the leader of the political party that controls the executive branch. Chief Legislator, as the president proposes the legislative agenda to Congress. And Chief Citizen, as the president is traditionally the representative of all of the people. The implied powers of the president are equal, if not more important, than what is expressly stated in the Constitution. Go to the next slide. The implied powers of the president are what really drives the executive branch, and one of the most implied powers is the president as policymaker. The president expressly proposes legislation for consideration by Congress in an annual speech called the State of the Union Address. What does that look like? The president is required to deliver this address to Congress pursuant to Article 3, Section 2, Clause 1 of the Constitution. So the Constitution specifically requires the president to talk to Congress, and in doing so, the president must give to Congress information of the State of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall deem necessary and expedient. In other words, the address is primarily used by the president to set forth the foreign and domestic policy positions of the executive branch for the year. This is when the president tells Congress and the nation, here's how we're going to run this country in the next year. Because the president gets to do this, the opposing political party expresses its position as well. The president says, here's how we're going to move the nation forward, and the opposing party gets to say, maybe not so much. That's not the only way the president is a policymaker. The president also influences public policy in three ways. The president appeals directly to the people through daily briefings, speeches and sound bites, community outreach, internet and social media, and addresses to the nation. May the fourth be with you. No, we did not fall to the empire. The White House and the president, as chief citizen, is celebrating Star Wars Day. The president also approves or vetoes legislation. We know that's a check and balance. And the president appoints officials who carry out the laws. The president's 15-member executive cabinet and the members of independent agencies are appointed by the president to carry out the laws, execute the laws, enforce the laws of the United States on behalf of the President of the United States. Go to the next slide. Like many things dealing with the United States Constitution, the way we started at the beginning of this nation is not the way our government looks now. And to see that in full effect, we have to look at the real power of the president. Presidential power has grown in the years since the Constitution was ratified. You see, at first, the founders intended that Congress should be the dominant force in government. But then these three guys show up: Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and Harry Truman. And the growth of the president's power occurs in the 20th and 21st century. Because of these guys and some other presidents, the president is now the dominant force in government, not Congress. And there are multiple reasons for the growth of presidential power. Only one person at a time holds all of the power in the executive branch. The president serves a fixed term in office. The growth of political parties changed the role of the president. The language in Article 2 is vague and open to interpretation, and Congress actually gave the president some of their power through either delegation or abdication. Delegate it. We sweat the small stuff. In other words, Congress says to the president, implement the law as you best see fit. But here's the thing, when you keep doing that, all the small stuff adds up after a while. And the power has switched from Congress to the executive branch. Go to the next slide. Just how powerful has the executive branch grown? Real powerful. The president executes or implements the law through the cabinet departments and agencies of the United States government. And a lot of people work for the president. They work in the State Department, which is in charge of the international affairs of the United States. The Treasury Department, which is in charge of our financial affairs. The Defense Department, or DoD, that's the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. The Justice Department, who enforces the laws of the United States, and the Department of Interior. They're focused on federal land management. We have the Agricultural Department, which is all about farms and food, and the Commerce Department, which promotes economic growth nationwide. The Labor Department focuses on working conditions, while the Department of Health and Human Services protects our citizens' health on a national level. Housing and Urban Development focuses on housing policies, while the Transportation Department focuses on transportation. Then we have the Energy Department, which focuses on nuclear energy and safety, while the Education Department focuses on federal assistance for education. The Department of Veterans Affairs, that's patient care and benefits to our nation's veterans, and the Department of Homeland Security protects the homeland. Then we have a variety of independent agencies. They don't fall in any of these departments, like the Chief of Staff of the President, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Office of Management and Budget, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the Central Intelligence Agency, the United Nations Ambassador, the Small Business Administration, the United States Trade Representative, the list goes on. The Executive Department is powerful Because the executive department is the largest branch of our federal government. Go to the next slide. Just like at the federal level, Virginia state government has an executive branch, and that executive branch is run by the governor of Virginia, who exercises the formal executive powers granted by Article 5 of the Virginia Constitution. But before we go any further, let's look at some former governors of Virginia. They are people like Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Harrison V, James Monroe, and John Tyler. These are signers of the Declaration of Independence and former presidents of the United States. And then we have some modern Virginia governors as well, people like Linwood Holton, Mills Godwin, and Douglas Wilder. So not only have our governors impacted Virginia state history, they have also impacted our national history. In carrying out both the formal and informal powers of the office, the governor fills several roles, including chief of state. And as chief of state, the governor is required to live in Richmond at the governor's mansion. The governor signs bills into law and has veto power over bills passed by the legislature, the General Assembly, and he communicates with other states and foreign powers. As the chief legislator, the governor can take the following legislative actions. He can amend bills submitted to him by the General Assembly for further consideration. We call that a line item veto. And he submits recommendations and calls special sessions of the General Assembly. As the chief administrator of Virginia government, the governor is effectively in charge of all state agencies, and he has the power to fill vacancies unless the position is appointed by the legislature. And he or she is the party chief. He or she is the top leader in the state political party of which he or she is a member. Two other things as well. The governor is commander-in-chief of the National Guard and Virginia Defense Force, and the governor can commute fines or sentences and issue pardons, and may also restore voting rights and overturn other political penalties on individuals. There's a lot of power in the governor's office, but there's one significant weakness. The governor can only have one term only. The governor can only serve as governor as 4 years, and because of this, the governor is one of the weaker positions in Virginia state government. Go to the next slide. Just like at the federal level, there is also a Virginia bureaucracy. As head of the executive branch, the governor is in charge of almost all of the departments of Virginia government. That's a lot of stuff to run, so he uses secretaries to help him. Not that type of secretary, although I will tell you, state government stops without them. Instead, we're talking about how the power of the executive branch is split among cabinet secretaries appointed by the governor, and thereafter broken down into departments, agencies, commissions, and regulatory boards. The governor says you run this part of the government, and from there it breaks down into smaller parts. Here's the thing. The departments of state government do the following. They administer the laws, they provide structure to agencies, they set forth policies, and they promulgate or create regulations. When you deal with a state agency, there are rules to follow, and we get to all know what those rules are because they are published for everyone to see. They enforce the laws. That's the Virginia State Police, the Virginia Marine Police. Any state law enforcement agency is enforcing the laws on behalf of state government. They regulate aspects of business and the economy. You learned that if you want to run a business and you want some sort of protection, you become a corporation. In Virginia, you do that by filing with the Virginia State Corporation Commission. But you also have to follow the rules of some agencies like the Virginia Marine Resource Commission and the Department of Environmental Quality. And then the state provides services. The Division of Motor Vehicles licenses you and registers your automobiles. The Virginia Department of Transportation, they build the roads and maintain the roads that we drive on. The Virginia Employment Commission, they take care of us. If we are fired from our own job for no reason of our own, they'll help us get through until we can get to that next job. These are the things that state government does. And The governor is not the only state official elected by the people. The Attorney General of Virginia is directly elected and is in charge of the Department of Law, which provides legal opinions and represents the Commonwealth in court. In other words, the Attorney General is the state's top lawyer and state's top law enforcement officer. And the lieutenant governor is also directly elected and is the president of the Virginia Senate. If something happens to the governor, the lieutenant governor would become governor. That's it for this lecture, and I look forward to seeing you in class.